Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching second and final part of What If Naruto was the strongest swordsman in DXD universe. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
Those who walked the earth were showered with modest blessings from the brilliant and dazzling rays of the ever-luminous sun. The innermost sanctum of a particular church, where a boy of about 8 years old was walking ever so silently with a sheathed Japanese katana strapped on his back, was illuminated by the same rays of light that passed through the various stained glass windows that featured pictures of famous martyrs. A slightly more stoic gentleman walked beside the boy. "Emotions," said the effeminate European gentleman with platinum blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, who exuded an aura of mystery and wonder. "That is what you lack, young one." As he continued to walk alongside the enigmatic gentleman, the boy simply cocked his head sideways in perplexity. "Emotions?" The man's rather feminine lips let out a sigh. "I had hoped that your sessions with Seal or Alexander would be enough to draw out some form of emotion within you, but as far as I could see, aside from learning their fighting style, you haven't learned anything. I thought that emotions weren't needed. Master Garul told me that they were." The boy was abruptly interrupted by the platinum blonde man with silver eyes, who said, "What Garul taught you doesn't matter. My old friend's method, despite its effectiveness, is rather lacking. I'm sorely disappointed at his archaic approach into training you. He fails to see the value of emotions in human beings. He prefers to mold a person by means of detaching them from their emotions. I am sure that he has already tried such a method with you." He raised his eyebrows in disapproval. The man sighed again and said, "Then again, his ideals lie solely on his own form of justice and vengeance. Such is the aspect of heaven that he represents." The boy's brows furrowed. "I don't understand. Master Garul has never lied to me." The man shook his head and said, "I'm not saying he did. The only thing I'm saying is that my child, emotions are fickle. Very, very fickle, yet necessary for one such as yourself." "Why?" "Because with emotions, in one moment they can be the source of infinite strength that will allow you to defeat all your enemies, but the next it could turn into your greatest weakness, bringing forth not only your defeat but also your death. Why bother having it if it's both an asset and a liability?" The immature man gave the boy a sorrowful and almost look. "That is why I found it necessary to intervene with your training, Naruto-kun. You need to learn of emotions. You need to understand it for both your own sake and for the sake of achieving your true potential, much like the very same potential that your ancestor showed." "My ancestor?" the boy asked, tilting to the side as he made every effort to follow the older man. With a slight smile on his face, the man whispered, "The second sage of the six paths. The man who killed a god, married another, then ascended into godhood, the very same man who represented the epitome of human potential." His powerful silver eyes were looking at the child. "Do you know what gave him strength?" In response, the boy shook his head with a tiny smile that never left his normally icy and stoic exterior. The older man replied, "Bonds, my child. He gained his immense power from the idea of protecting those who he considered his precious people. To protect his bonds, he gained power that far surpassed human comprehension, allowing him to slay the Shinju and the primordial god's chosen one in mortal combat." Since he had never heard of this story before, a man who killed a god of all things, the boy found himself paying close attention to what the older man had to say. "Your friendship with that girl Asia has already yielded great results. You now know of happiness, and you also have a grasp of the concept of sadness and its direct correlation with happiness. Have you not felt it after meeting her? The desire to make her happy? The desire to be stronger for the sake of not seeing her sad?" After giving it some serious thought, the boy nodded in agreement. The effeminate man grinned brightly and said, "Excellent. That's why I think you need to get more bonds." The boy found himself repeating the effeminate man's words, "More bonds?" As he guided the boy through a set of wooden doors located within the sanctum's innermost workings, the older man declared, "We're here." The two were greeted by a well-lit scene that bore some resemblance to Japanese kendo dojos. The room's walls were lined with numerous swords of all kinds, and its floors were composed of gleaming wooden planks. The boy ignored the majority of the four people in the room as he followed his teacher to the largest and oldest member of the group. A lovely sister of Northern European heritage greeted them both with a courteous bow. The effeminate man was the first to say, "Good morning, Griselda." "Good morning to you as well, Father Luce." As he pointed to the young blonde who was standing silently by his side, the effeminate Father Luce adopted a slightly more formal manner. "You are aware of who this boy is?" he asked. "I have already read the reports. Truth be told, I assumed that I would have had a hand in his training earlier, but it appears that I was mistaken," the nun said, a soft and kind tone. "It was necessary. The time he spent with Seal and Alexander both served to create a perfect foundation for him before he started wielding the Kusanagi. I have read in the reports that he knows of Seal and Alexander's fighting style, though the report didn't state how efficient he was with it. Oh, you'd be surprised. I see a question, if you wouldn't mind, father. Yes, my dear? Why are you making me train him? I know full well that he is a student of Garul. Father Luce let out an exasperated sigh. That is precisely why I want you to train him. You see, my old friend hasn't been the same since the last war. Yes, his loyalty still lies with the high heavens, but his methods and ways are beginning to go out of hand. War does tend to change people. The man turned away from Griselda and looked at the younger blonde's figure, saying, oh, if only you knew. You know of my ability, right? Perception of light, is it not? The female exorcist told her. The effeminate man looked at the boy who was still standing beside him and said, true, I can see the light that is inside mortal men. He observed that the boy's eyes were flitting about the room, probably trying to get a feel for it. The man closed his eyes as though blinded by a strong light, and a few tears trickled from the corner of his eyes. The light that exists within that boy far surpasses anything that I have ever seen during my lifetime. So strong, so pure, I could even say it's too pure. I want to see it grow naturally as it is, untainted by the methods which my friend employs. I know it may be too late, as I can see it taint within his heart, but there is still a chance. I will so to it as my responsibility as a son of God to see the light within the boy flourish. As she looked at the momentarily preoccupied boy, Grimelda questioned, and if the boy were to leave and abandon our faction? Then he shall still have my support. The higher-ups in heaven will not be happy to hear that. Oh, there is no need to worry about that. I am sure that Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael will let me do as I please. They owe me that much. The boy standing next to him, seemingly waiting for his orders, caught the effeminate priest's attention. His kind voice sounded a little flat, but he said, Naruto. When the boy was removed from his caretakers, he blinked, yes, Father Luce. I need to talk with Griselda for a moment. Could you please go look around the room and perhaps talk with the other children? He left the two adults alone, and the boy just nodded in reply. The boy's eyes were once again searching the room after he had separated from the two adults. The room was bright, the floor was shiny, and there were numerous weapons. These seemingly insignificant stimuli were all new to the boy. The boy's head turned in the direction of the red flash that glimpsed into the side of his vision. He discovered a lovely flower that looked familiar sitting in a vase on top of a desk at the rear of the room. A rose? He asked, blinking a few times to make sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. The boy's eyes were drawn to the crimson flower and he muttered, a red rose? It possessed a sense of joyful vigor and strength that he had never seen before, rather than the same tranquility and mystique unnaturalness that the blue rose possessed. In its own right, it was lovely. Hey. The boy blinked, remembering at last that the woman he was talking to and his father Luce were not the only people in the room. A tuft of blue hair, belonging to one of the three boys his age who were standing and staring at him, greeted his eyes as he turned in the direction of the voice. The boy scratched the back of his head and said, I'm sorry about that, I was a bit distracted. Standing next to a silver-haired boy with red eyes, a boy with blonde hair laughed and said, no need to apologize, even I do that sometimes, especially when I think about food. The boy grinned as a trail of drool trickled from the corner of his mouth. Food. What's the matter with him? In a handshake, the silver-haired boy said, he does that sometimes, no need to worry about it, that's just how he is. You look tough, kid. I like that, hope we get a good scrap or two later. By the way, his name is Siegfried. After shaking the hand, the boy with the blonde hair said, my name is Naruto Uzumaki. Siegfried smiled. He pushed the other boy with the blonde hair in the ribs and said, nice meeting you, Naruto. Hey, stop spacing out and introduce yourself. Before turning to face Naruto, the other blonde boy blinked and gave a sheepish laugh. He inquired, hey, do you like snacks? I do not dislike them. The boy held out his right hand to Naruto, and the other blonde grabbed it and gave it a good shake. Then I think we'll get along fine. I'm Dulio Gesualdo, nice meeting you. Naruto Uzumaki, he repeated his introduction. Chinese? Inquired Dulio. He corrected the boy. Japanese? Sushi, sashimi, ramen, soba, udon, gyudon, katsudon, oyakudon, tempura. The green-eyed blonde then started to nod off again as he considered various Japanese dishes. The sight only caused Naruto to perspire. Siegfried touched the newcomer's back with a knowing hand. You'll get used to it soon, trust me, you will. The only thing the sage's descendant could do was nod. The kid with the blue hair, who was last in the group, simply stared at the newcomer before speaking up. Naruto Uzumaki, your name is weird. Easily dismissing what many would consider an insult, the blue-eyed youth simply cocked his head to the side. Then what's your name? The boy answered, it's Xenovia. Your name, Naruto said, opening his mouth to answer in a frank and naive manner. It's even stranger than mine. "No, it's not." "Yes, it is," was his blunt response. "No, it isn't." The boy gave a shrug. "Whatever makes you sleep at night." "Grr, stupid, weird name boy, weird name boy." The blue-haired boy glared at Naruto. "You're the boy with the weird name. What kind of a name is Xenovia?" "I'm a girl." The boy didn't bother to express his surprise. He just raised an eyebrow. He responded honestly, "Well, you look like a boy. Nothing about you looks like a girl at all." This caused the self-described girl to growl low. Xenovia growled for a few seconds before sticking out her tongue and blowing him a raspberry. Blair. Siegfried took Dulio by the back of his shirt and said, "HN." He dragged the young exorcist trainee away, keeping them away from the visibly angry Xenovia and the comparatively composed newcomer. "Yeah, the two of us are not going to get in between this." Father Luce approached Xenovia and Naruto and said, My, it looks like we have a pair of energetic kids with us today." The latter gave him a small bow of respect, but the former quickly ignored him. As she walked alongside the feminine-looking priest, Griselda Quadra remarked, "I don't really know how you can call your student energetic, but with regard to Xenovia I have to agree that she is a bit headstrong, aggressive, and energetic. If only she could calm down a bit, then I could truly start teaching her the ways of the sword." The priest proposed to have a fight between the two of them. The nun asked, should they use their holy swords? And promptly accepted the man's recommendation. Father Luce looked at the two children and said, "We'll let them. I'll step in if it gets too serious. Would you two agree to that? A fight between the two of you to resolve this small argument?" In fact, this time, the blue-haired girl responded, saying, "Master Griselda has taught me since like forever. It wouldn't be fair for the new kid. I'll beat him up so easily that it won't be funny." "I accept." A few minutes later, Griselda, Luce, an animated Siegfried, and Dulio, who was still dozing off, stood on the sidelines, while Naruto and Xenovia stood in the center of the dojo-like room. Father Luce, who was smiling slightly, observed the two children as they drew their holy swords and remarked, "This is the most fired up I've seen you in your entire life. We haven't been here for 10 minutes and the other kids are already having a positive influence on the boy." Then Xenovia held a big blue sword with a golden edge in both hands and said, "Aren't you worried that you'd be humiliated by a girl?" The boy, who was holding an elaborate katana in both hands, swiftly responded, "No, I won't be humiliated because I know we'll win. I can already see it." "You're pretty overconfident, a bit too confident if you ask me. Only because you're underestimating me." The blue-haired girl smiled and gripped her blade tightly before running wildly in the direction of the blonde boy, who quickly followed and ran in the direction of the brunette. At a speed far beyond the capabilities of children their own age, the two kids charged at each other. The children quickly drew their swords, with the girl still wielding her sword with both hands and the boy now holding a gorgeous, ornate silver Japanese katana in one hand. The two kids were ready to attack their opponent with violence. For a brief moment, a flash of blue and yellow passed one another, creating a green hue that was accompanied by tiny sparks as their weapons briefly touched. Then, the flashes split apart, leaving each fighter standing in the opposite position from where they began. To the left, the boy's blade reached out. To the right, the girl's blade reached out. The sharp clash of steel against steel echoed throughout the room, followed by the cracking sounds of metal. A blade broke and cracked in a single, fast exchange. The battle ended with the crack of a blade. The winner was determined by the crack of a blade. The girl was briefly torn by the sound of a blade breaking. Another bond formed with the shattering of a blade. Play the Ochiabun Ost for Naruto Shippuden. According to the Book of Genesis, the biblical God created the world in 7 days. Although Naruto Uzumaki was not God, 7 days had gone by for him. 7 long days have passed since he arrived at the Vatican, and 7 days have passed since the rainy night when he stood in front of the blue roses and expressed his grief. Oh, the 7 long, painful days he spent thinking about and assessing what he had done during the witch hunt, the what-ifs. And it would never end if I did. In actuality, his actions only caused mental anguish to the extent that he had to suppress, push back, and put up with the thoughts and memories that tormented him endlessly. He was unable to combat the sadness that accompanied those memories and thoughts, and even helping others and making them happy over the course of the previous week denied him the little sense of fulfillment that came from seeing people smile. Therefore, the young man diverted himself from making other people happy by practicing and improving his skills until the day he had been waiting for came, and it did. He was again allowed to accept missions for 7 days after arriving in the church capital to go out into the field and kill pagan people in God's name. He only needed to fight and kill. There was no need for thought, contemplation, or introspection. He loved going on missions and killing heathens all over the world. Because of this, there was little reflection or thought. It's as easy as finding the target and killing them. Naruto nodded courteously to two priests who stood watch at the door to his handler's office. He didn't have a smile on his face when he entered this time. Rather, he proceeded toward the middle of the simple, sparsely furnished room, pausing a few paces in front of the big wooden table where the elderly, silver-haired, silver-eyed man sat. Garul's voice was deep and soft as she said, "Hello, Naruto." Before answering the greeting in kind, Naruto bowed his head slightly, "Hello, Master Garul." With those strong silver eyes that seemed to be peering through Naruto's very existence, the elderly man gave him a critical glance. The exorcist with the bespectacles tried his best to conceal his uneasiness. "Is there something bothering you, my child?" The exorcist shook his head hastily. The older man scowled at his nearly robotic response, which read, "My mind is clear of any distractions. My body is healed of all its wounds. In the past 7 days I have not dulled. I am a sword ready to be drawn." "You did not answer the question, my child." "No," Naruto said without hesitation, because he was well aware that displaying this would cause his handler and mentor to question him more deeply, which would surely result in the revelation of his heretical choice to leave Asia's body with her sacred gear in the middle of a group of devils rather than destroying and burning it as protocol dictates. The room fell silent as the older man continued to stare sternly at the young exorcist. After about 30 seconds, Garul looked away, allowing Naruto to feel a sense of relief. "Are you sure with your words, my child? Your body may be healed, but your mind is still plagued with unease. Though I am not one who can read minds or peer deep within your very soul, I can see that something is amiss. What it is I cannot say, and I am sure that you will not confide to me of your problems as in your mind. It will make me sad to do so." The older gentleman raised his eyebrows. "Why the child have to undergo such a difficult childhood? Are you truly ready to go out on the field once more and deliver the justice of God towards all the heretics and heathens that roam this mortal plane?" As he stood before the older man, Naruto flatly responded, "I am the sword of God who brings judgment upon the world, humanity's weapon against the damned. You need only to point me to the right direction and I will bring forth divine retribution." The big, muscular man put his hand on his chin and played with his imaginary beard, saying, "I see. If you think that you are ready to venture out in the world, then who am I to stop you? As long as you destroy our enemies, then you have my blessings to roam the lands as you please." Naruto gave his handler a small nod of agreement. "Then can I get a mission today? Preferably one that involves a rather high-ranking enemy." The older man got up and walked to the large bookcases behind his desk, which housed a number of files and mission requests. "Give me a minute or two." Naruto couldn't resist pointing out, "You know this would be easier if you used the computer that I gave you." The older man examined a number of papyrus scrolls and said, "Nonsense. The church has survived for generations without technology." He took one folder out from between several papyrus scrolls, scanned its contents, and put it on the table with one hand while rearranging the other scrolls. "As much as I appreciate you buying me a computer, in my opinion we need not indulge ourselves with such objects. Keeping things simple and following the traditional methods set by the founders is better than relying in the inventions of men, specifically those that indulge in the ways of the heretical art known as science." The older man spat out, clearly distasteful. "Technological advancement is just one way of saying that people are losing faith in God, the angels, and the churches." Finally, he turned away from the case and leaned back in his chair, adding, "I barely tolerate you using that phone of yours." Naruto was yawning inwardly during one of his mentor's drawn-out sermons. As usual, if this is what came out of the computer he bought him a few months ago, he really shouldn't have bothered. He looked carefully at the folder that Garul had set on the desk and said, half-heartedly, "I apologize for buying the computer then. If sticking with the old ways makes you happy, then I will do my best not to impose upon you with modern technology." Vampiram Venation gazing at the folder that surely held the information for his mission, Naruto found himself furrowing his brow. Another vampire hunt? Indeed, Naruto remembered all of the vampire hunting missions he had completed prior to his mission in Kuo and remarked, "That's the 9th one over this last 2 months. Their kind has been really active recently." The older man said, "Something is amiss." He clasped his hands and intertwined his fingers in a pose that resembled that of a certain nerve commander. "It may be due to the rising tensions between the Carmilla faction and the Teps faction. From the information the church has gathered, this is due to an imminent war breaking out between the two sides because of Valerie Teps, the leader of the Teps faction, who wields one of the Longinus." Recalling that Teps is a male-dominated faction and Carmilla is a female-dominated faction, Naruto asked briefly, "A war between the male and female vampire groups. Should we worry about how this will affect the church?" The older man laughed and shook his head before his laughter died down. He remarked, "There is no need for that. Heathens killing one another, such a glorious day for our organization. Sadly, this hunt that you are about to undertake has nothing to do with the two factions. In fact, this mission relates to vampire thought to have been killed many years ago." Naruto nodded as he found himself processing the information. Older vampires were clearly more dangerous because they had more experience and knowledge generally speaking. Vampires who lived past the age of 200 posed a far greater threat than younger ones. For example, the young Teps he killed in that cemetery weeks ago probably didn't live past the age of 100. Am I going solo on this one? He took the folder and gave it to the bespectacled exorcist, saying, "Your partner for this mission is already in the area. You'll know who it is when you see the person." Opening the folder, the sage's descendant looked through its contents. His partner's identity was not written down, but there was unquestionably a place mentioned: Milan, Italy. The elderly man gave a nod. It is quite close by 5 hours if you take a car, and about a few hours or even less if you take an airplane. Naruto nodded as he continued to look through the folder, considering all of the information that was, to be honest, rather hazy. After looking through the folder in silence for a few seconds, he came across a name that caused his eyes to widen a little. The older man successfully diverted Naruto's attention from the folder and back to Garul by saying, "Ah. I see you have found the problem I have with this mission." Sadly, despite this mission being near our territory, another organization who deals with vampires has been alerted and has dispatched one of their own to deal with the threat. He let out a sigh. After conversing with the head of the organization, it has been agreed upon that you are to collaborate with them as much as possible. A sickening thought, our organization working with one of their, but mind you, it might be needed this one time. And why is that? I am sure that my partner and I, whoever he or she is, would be enough to deal and neutralize this threat. Garul gazed at the executor, his brows furrowed. Rumors and such, mostly speculations from certain texts from our archives. Apparently this was an extremely strong vampire which supposed to have been killed years ago by man hailing from Japan, but for it appears that the vampire has survived for some unknown reason. I see. Does he have any abilities that I should worry about? Your target has the usual array of vampire capabilities, most likely with a surprise of 2. Nothing outside your capabilities as far as I'm concerned, though a little backup would help if things were ever to go south. The man with silver hair laughed, and knowing you, they will definitely go south. Does it have to be them? The senior man smiled. The vampire hunters of Great Britain, you should be familiar with their group, after all you've met them several times in the past. The blonde muttered under his breath, Helsing, as flashbacks to his former teacher raced through his head. The ex-paladin who survived and became a monster in order to battle other monsters. Isn't this out of their jurisdiction? The man said, it is, but unfortunately they had business in the area when the vampire sightings first occurred, and well, let's just say that there were people who made rather poor choices which resulted in their organization being contracted along with ours to deal with the threat. His calmness was unnatural and serene, but it was undoubtedly laced with an irrepressible amount of anger. Naruto tucked the folder between his shoulders and closed it in his hands, saying, I see. Calling it a bad experience would be a gross understatement, as that organization was responsible for the death of one of Naruto's former masters. As much as I hate to tell you this, I expect you to be on your best behavior when you're working alongside them, since I do know that you've had a rather bad experience with the organization in the past. As he put his hand on his glasses and pushed them up, Naruto appeared composed and unflappable. I will try my best. Give it more than your best, as I do not want to deal with more paperwork and such. All the younger man could do was nod when the older man took a few seconds to respond. Naruto took it as a sign to go. If that is all, then I would be going now, since I still need to stop by the Armory to resupply. With a slight push, the exorcist opened the door after turning around and approaching it. He was about to leave the room when the older man's deep voice called out to him, Naruto. Yes, master? Naruto didn't have to look back to see that his handler was staring at him sharply. I want you to be honest with me. Did you carry out your last mission to the best of your capabilities, meeting all of its objectives? I did, master. There was silence for a brief second more before Garul broke it. I see. You may go. If Naruto had bothered to turn around between their conversation and leaving the room, he would not have missed the frown that marred the older man's face. Thank you, the executor said as he finally left the room. With millions of adherents spread across practically every nation on Earth, the Church, also known as the Heaven faction of the larger biblical faction, is a very big and intricate organization. Unfortunately, not all of those followers are aware of the Church's true operations. In fact, only roughly 30% of its members are aware of what goes on behind the scenes, with the exception of the four seraphs, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, who guarded the throne of heaven. The Church was typically made up of numerous subdivisions or agencies, each of which was led by a different archangel or angel. These divisions, which made up the Church, had a wide range of specializations. One of the most well-known branches of the Church, for instance, is the Order of Templar. a group of knights and warriors under the leadership of the angel Sandalphon who act as the church's and its members' protectors because it is led by Sandalphon's brother Metatron and operates in the shadows to act as a buffer against the knights' highly visible selves. The Order of Umbra is a branch of church ninjas that is closely related to the Order. The Church of Necessary Evil, another well-known organization, is known as Necessarius. It is the primary branch of the church that deals with calming and maintaining order among the different magical organizations in this world. Additionally, there is the Assembly of the Eight, a specialized division of the church tasked with managing, recovering, and conducting research on holy relics located all over the world. Raziel, the Seraph of Mysteries, is in charge of both groups' supervision and leadership. The Iscariot Order is one of the more dubious factions within the church. It is headed by the Thunder of God Ramil and is regarded as the main organization responsible for killing vampires, as well as the organization that develops the church's science and weapons, along with the Burial Agency and the Executors. This branch is regarded as one of the darker divisions and involved a significant amount of human experimentation. Regarding the Burial Agency, which is also run by Ramil, it is a branch of the church that focuses on demons, both researching and killing them because abilities are valued more highly than faith in this group. They are referred to as the church's black sheep. Out of all the divisions, this one has the highest number of non-believers. Last but not least were the Executors, a beautiful branch of the church that dealt with the total annihilation of all heretical beings and was headed by Regule, the Seraph of Justice and Vengeance. Since the majority of its members are regarded as excellent killers who have turned into humanity's weapon against all the world's evils, many people view this as the bloodiest and most violent division of the church. When Naruto Uzumaki was accepted into their ranks, he was 10 years old. The Armory was just one of hundreds of the church's divisions, and like its rather uninspired and straightforward name, it functioned as a group that was in charge of acquiring, maintaining, and eventually distributing all of the weapons made by the different church subdivisions that are sent and piled into divisions. Even so, the Armory was unique in that access to the group's division and even information about its members were strictly restricted to those who had a legitimate need to know. Since information and access to the Armory were reserved for a select group of people the church deemed to be the best of the best, some of the employees who worked in the less visible areas of the church were actually unaware of its existence. This allowed them to obtain the best qualities of all the weapons the church had created. Play the Dollhouse OST from Ghost in the Shell. For this reason, Naruto Uzumaki was at that precise moment traversing the pitch-black, underground tunnels beneath the Vatican. Since he was aware that the path would not open to anyone carrying a torch in these tunnels, he did not bother lighting his way with one. After all, the treasuries and tools that were waiting inside the Armory could only be reached by those who dared to brave the extreme darkness without the aid of light. The bespectacled exorcist moved through the shadows for what seemed like hours. He ascended 2 flights of stairs and descended 2 more. He ducked and went into an unutilized sewage steed to the right after slipping in a small crevice on a wall that led to the left. After pushing down a hidden wall and moving to the left, he kicked down a pillar that led to a door that led to a similarly dim hallway on the right. After a few minutes of walking down this corridor, he came to a small altar featuring an angel with 2 hands extended and a blindfold. Numerous Latin letters were strewn all over the altar. He placed the letters B and A on the angel's hands, making sure to place the B on the left hand and the A on the right, after carefully running his finger through each object until he found them. The exorcist said in the shadows, "Anidium. Start." The only answer he received was a faint clicking noise that reverberated throughout the hallway. This was a minor sound in comparison to the louder one that soon followed. The altar itself sank into the earth, exposing a rather spacious passageway concealed behind it that led to a final set of doors. This was the route to the Armory, the final stop on his spontaneous tour. The executor inhaled deeply before continuing on the final path, moving slowly and steadily through the darkness until he was just a few feet from the big doors that acted as the final obstacle in his way. Before he could even get to this set of doors, though, a burst of intense white light radiated through the dim hallway, forcing Naruto to cover his face with his hand to shield his eyes from the sudden brightness. From the darkness came a deep voice asking, "Why do you cover your eyes from the light, young one?" The exorcist's danger senses went into overdrive when he heard those words. With his hands already on the handle of his sacred blade, his body ready for battle, his eyes scanning and observing the newcomer to gauge its threat level, he leapt back before he even realized it, away from the source of light. An eerie figure wearing a pure white cloak that concealed the majority of his or her features from the outside world stood in the once dark hallway in a most terrifying way. Wisps of holy white energy drifted from the figure's body. The energy that emanated from this being left Naruto speechless for a moment. It was pure and sheer holiness, an exaggerated amount of holiness that verged on being vile and downright frightening. With his guard up, Naruto couldn't resist asking, Who are you? A deathly pale hand holding what appeared to be a large tome, a pristine silver tome that radiated the same eerie aura as the cloaked figure, was revealed to the blonde by the figure as they extended their hand from beneath their cloak. He or she let go of the book, and instead of it falling to the ground, it floated around the figure's body, spinning around him or her as though the figure were the sun. I have written and erased many names in my tome. As those words escaped the figure's lips, Naruto sensed a fierce stare from beneath the hood that concealed the figure's face. What I write is the birth of man. What I erase is the name of the man at death forever. I shall write until the world reaches its end. Who am I? Naruto assembled the clues the odd figure had given him. Less than a second later, he made the connection and let go of his weapon, bowing his head in respect. He who heralds the end, the only unfallen among the angels of death, Sariel. Naruto is once again on guard as the path trembles due to the overwhelming presence of the vile holiness that immediately fills the room. I see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. With my eyes I gaze upon your very soul. With my ears I listen to the command of God. With my mouth I only speak the truth. The white hand that held the sword was pale. You need not tense. I will not hurt you, son of the sage. The exorcist quickly found himself giving in to the angel's words, even though his mind protested that he should be keeping his guard up and acting in the most rational way possible. His life was already forfeited if the figure so desired. After all, if this was indeed one of the seraphs of death. The figure nodded and said, "Excellent, though I see that something is forming within your mind. You wish to ask something. Do not hesitate. I answer only in truths. Why is one of the seraphs here?" The book that was floating and spinning around him paused for a second before opening and revealing the word, "The Armory," written inside. I was just checking my division. As the angel who represents the aspect death, it is my job to look over the tools for combat. The weapons our warriors wield to slay the damned. Now come, O young one. Tell me of why you choose to pass my domain? The domain of the archangel that represents the aspect of death in the heavens. The command of God, Sariel. Naruto responded honestly and without hesitation, so as not to offend the angel in any way, which he would prefer to avoid. For the sake of my mission, I need some steel for the wrath of God my opponents shall feel. For the sake of my mission, I need to break the rules that God has created. I need weapons, swords, arms, amulets. I need them all for the sake of ending lives, to fight and bring forth death and destruction. The archangel nodded, and there was a slow rustle of the head. The angel laughed and said, "A sword, yes, you really are a sword. A weapon used against our foes." The cloaked figure moved away from the door that he had blocked, saying, "A sword must be sharp, strong, and durable. To achieve all that, a sword must be well kept and maintained. Very well, you may pass my domain. Go on and arm yourself, combat as you see fit, and continue delivering the judgment of God towards the enemies of the church. Go on, disciple of the angel of vengeance. Go and spread the justice of God in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost." With a solemn gesture of respect, Naruto lowered his head. He gave a silent, "Amen," and then hurried to the doors that the cloaked angel guarded, leaving the angel of death, who by that time was holding his book, behind. With a ghostly laugh that would have chilled anyone's spine, the angel of death said, "I have erased many names due to your actions, and I will erase many more." The angel's frame began to be embraced by bright white wisps before he vanished in a literal explosion of dazzling white lights that signaled the return of the complete darkness that ruled the secret path. Sariel said, "I eagerly await what the future holds for you, descendant of the sage, Naruto Uzumaki." Play Sword Art Online Ost, Extended Daily Life. The wall was composed of black glass. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to describe it as unsettling, odd, and out of place, because the wall was engraved with numerous runes, symbols, seals, and crosses that gave the impression of a single, enormous black mural. Even though those items had a function, it was thanks to them that the attack of ultimate-class devils could be repelled by this enormous magically strengthened and enchanted glass that covered the whole dimly lit room known as the Armory. The fact that the glass wall was several meters high and occupied most of the space demonstrated how roomy and expansive the space was. Even though it was underground, there were a number of wooden tables without chairs a few feet in front of this glass colossus of a wall. They were pieces of furniture that were only there to give the few individuals who had access to this room a chance to inspect and evaluate the weapons and supplies they obtained from it. Speaking of supplies and weapons, as Naruto had anticipated, he was the only person in the room when he looked around. It should come as no surprise that he could use his hands and feet to count the number of people who were permitted to enter this room without restriction. The bespectacled blonde exorcist approached the tinted wall with feather-light footsteps. He knew that the people on the other side of the wall were already keeping an eye on him, so he didn't bother knocking or prodding any of the runes and symbols on it. Before giving his orders, Naruto took a deep breath to calm himself after his encounter with the Angel of Death. which had obviously unnerved him to some degree. The young man with the bespectacles pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose and said, 6 sets of 100 mphs. 1228 with maximum purity, 25 bundles of sacred parchments made of papyrus, 8 flash bombs, 9 bottles of holy water, 100 blank oriental note, 4 silver rosaries, 1 sacred stake made out of ivory, and 100 cups of ramen sealed inside a scroll. Make sure they vary in flavor, preferably of the spicy variety but none of the curry stuff. Naruto waved his hand dismissively. I don't really like curry, especially when you mix it with noodles. A surge of murderous intent filled the armory as soon as he said those words. Naruto's attention was instantly drawn to a familiar feminine voice that said, "Oh, who is this bad-mouthing curry?" This caused him to turn away from the wall and tilt his head in the direction of one of the other armory entrances. A young woman who appeared to be no older than 16 or 17 was approaching him slowly. She was wearing a black nun's habit without the headpiece, and she had bright blue eyes and darkish blue hair. The thin young lady had a sly, or perhaps angry, smile on her face as she strode in his direction, her combat boots making light treads. She is one of the leading female executors of the church, a member of the burial agency branch, and one of his sensei. With a slight sly smile, Naruto stated bluntly, the very same person who thinks curry is disgusting and inferior when compared to ramen. You cheeky kid. Haven't I converted you to the glory of curry after all of these years? The nun said, after his words seemed to set the young woman off, causing her to run frantically towards him and eventually trap his head in a one-handed headlock. When he felt her grip tighten, he realized he had said something incorrectly. I shall only convert upon death, Yumi-sensei. With an overtly sweet tone that Naruto noticed was typical of rather strong women, the blue-haired young woman asked, Naruto Kohai, what did I tell you to call me? He said flatly, Megane-sensei. As expected, the headlock became more snug but not uncomfortable. Not that. With an innocent sideways head tilt, Naruto asked, cosplay fetishist sensei? As she tightened her hold on the boy's neck, causing the younger exorcist to gasp in terror. A tick mark appeared on the woman's head. Definitely not that one brat. Curry-sensei. Close but still no dice. She changed the headlock to a one-armed embrace, pressing her body against his back and pouting with her lips quivering slightly as she rested her head on the crook of his neck. Don't tell me you've forgotten about me after all those nights we've spent together. Has my cute and adorable Deshi, disciple, / Kohai, Jr., really forgotten about all that? With a quick turn around, Naruto released himself from her embrace and rolled his eyes. He retorted, patting his own back when he saw his sensei squirm in shock, obviously not expecting him to tease her back. We were training at nights and I was like 6 at the time. If we're going with what you're insinuating, then wouldn't that make you a cradle-robbing pedophile who craves for young boys? The senior exorcist gave a sly smile after shaking her head. Well, we are members of the church, and you know how there's been issues with some priests who, as you said, love little. In an instant, Naruto interrupted his sensei before she could finish her sentence, saying, and I think that's a good place to stop that conversation, Seal-sensei. Why? Is it because Kohai-kun can't handle a little humor? Seal asked, placing her hands on her hips. No, but I don't think people will be happy if they heard what we're talking about, especially those people who you don't know and just suddenly comments on how much a failure you are at life based on one thing you've said, he replied bluntly. Where did that come from? Naruto gave a shrug. I'm not really sure, perhaps from a memory from a previous life, a past incarnation? He felt his sensei's murderous intent slightly increase, but it was only there for a split second before it disappeared before he realized what he had said. Naruto raised an eyebrow in perplexity at her behavior. Naruto swiftly waved his hands in front of his body and said, I'm sorry, sensei, I didn't mean it that way. The blonde caught the brunette's attention for a moment, and then she let out a sigh. Fine, I'm going to forgive you this one time. It's been so long since we've seen each other and because I know you didn't mean it. The senior executor responded because of a certain vampire's actions that ruined her life. Discussing previous incarnations and lives was a bit of a sensitive subject. She abruptly shifted the subject of their conversation by asking, so how's my cute Kohai doing? The boy had to smile strangely as a number of memories flashed through his mind. Not good nor bad, just normal. Yes, just normal. She briefly glanced in the direction of the younger exorcist. That's good. Sometimes normal is fine for people in our line of work. Anything more or less would definitely mean that there's something wrong going on in you. So how were your previous missions? Anything that you want to talk about? He answered quickly, there's nothing to talk about. I did my duties, just like always, that's all to say about them. With a sigh, the elderly woman scratched the back of her head. She truly cared for the younger exorcist, as evidenced by her honest statement. No need to get defensive, Naruto-kun. I just want you to remember Kohai-kun. If you ever need anyone to talk to, someone to just listen, you know how to reach me. Since Seal treated Naruto more like a younger brother than a student, it wasn't all that far from the truth. Feeling bad for causing her anxiety, he responded, I'm sorry, senpai, it's just that my previous missions have been rather mentally exhausting. I didn't mean to act all defensive like that. He didn't like it when people were worried because he disliked people being sad, and worry usually led to sadness. I'll remember your offer, okay? I promise I'll tell you later when I feel better. I'll even treat you out to curry. As though recalling a scene from the past, the brunette smiled faintly, her smile somber and melancholic. Now that's the Naruto-kun that I know. A loud clicking sound came from the glass wall. Before the two could continue their conversation, Naruto turned to face the enormous wall and discovered that a small section of it was open. A small cart filled with everything he had ordered was pushed out of the opening before it closed. The entire process takes place in a single second. Seal gave a little whistle. People in this department still work pretty damned fast. That they do, sensei. That they do. Naruto approached the cart and started searching through the different items he had asked for. He scanned the 6 cases with care and discovered that each one contained about 100 swords. He nodded to himself and carefully rolled up the sleeves of his white jacket to show off a number of tattoos and seals that extended down his forearm. Seal asked, do you know anyone from this division? As she examined the various items her former student had purchased, occasionally nodding in approval to assess the item's quality. In response, Naruto sealed the mass-produced holy swords inside the tattoos on his arms and shook his head. People working here are labeled non-existent. No one knows who lurks behind that wall. We just know they provide us with the tools we need for our trade. Seal cast a suspicious glance at the wall of black stained glass. Really strange if you ask me. After lowering his sleeves, the exorcist proceeded to handle the other items in the cart. The rosaries, holy water, sacred scriptures, blank notes, and flash bombs were placed on the pockets lining Naruto's jacket. Why don't you ask your weapon, Nanako? Didn't you get her from here? She might know something about them. Then he carefully slipped the scroll bearing the name Ramen into the pocket of his pants. Seal approached the wall and lightly tapped it, saying, already did. She said she didn't know anything about the wall. I mean, I've been here way before you, Naruto-kun, and even I have no idea about what's behind this thing. He shoved the now empty card against the wall and said, that's strange. I expect her to at least know something about them. The cart vanished to the opposite side as a tiny hole appeared upon contact once more. Everything took place in less than a second, preventing onlookers from seeing what transpired inside the glass wall. In the spacious room, a somewhat slack voice said, Yo, Seal-san, Naruto-san. A familiar-looking young man with green eyes and blonde hair, dressed in priestly garb, approached Seal and Naruto as they turned to face the person calling their names. Before his final mission, Naruto turned to face his partner and said, Oh Dulio, is that you? When did you get back? The most powerful exorcist laughed. He gestured to a member of the burial agency and said, I just got back earlier today. We actually took the same flight to get back here, just different classes though. With a hint of annoyance in her voice, Seal questioned, why again was I stuck in economy while you were in first class? His peers gave him a blank look when he asked, digs on possessing the second strongest Longinus and being the strongest exorcist of the church. He laughed and chose to respond in a slightly more somber manner. Well, it might be because I could actually afford the tickets since you did say something about spending all your money in your little curry foray. Naruto gave his fellow blonde a nod of agreement. That is definitely like sensei. She gritted her teeth as she saw a picture of a certain vampire with golden blonde hair and thought, you blondes are teaming up on me. Why does it always have to be the blonde ones who always knows how to get in my nerves? Naruto looked at the other blonde. So what are you doing here, Dulio? Well, I'm here for a quick resupply. I just need some more holy water and a few rosaries. Seal objected, saying, Oi, don't just ignore me. She turned to the wall and gave some orders of her own after being ignored by the two, as was to be expected, and finally remembered why she had come in the first place. She then complained about blondes. Naruto folded his arms across his chest and said, That's rare for you. You almost never have to resupply since you just ice everything to oblivion using Zenith Tempest. Dulio gave a sheepish laugh. Well, something came up and I had an encounter with a really strong vampire in India about 2 weeks ago just after we separated from that mission. Vampires really are getting active these days. The bespectacled exorcist took a scroll out of his pockets as he gave the scroll to Dulio, who was clearly perplexed by it. He inquired, So how did the fight go? Before accepting the scroll, he responded, It was actually a challenge. Like seriously had to step up my game when I faced this guy. The strongest exorcist asked courteously, What is this? Dulio followed instructions and was rewarded with multiple boxes of mochi that came from the scroll. Mochi, just open it up and channel your energy into the seals. So you got yourself in a good scrap, huh? That's rare. You almost never get serious for anything. The last time I heard you got serious was when you got into a scuffle with the /dog from Grigori. He pulled out a piece of green tea mochi from one of the boxes and chewed on it, saying, he. I remember that fight. It was definitely one that I had to go all out. But that wasn't the case with this vampire. You see, this guy did this thing well. I don't really know what he was doing, but it was a pain cause. It was like he was teleporting all over the place. A sacred gear. Dulio shrugged his shoulders and said, maybe, though I never did find out cause the vamp. What was his name? Marlin. Yeah, I think it was Marlin. Basically ran away after I started taking the battle seriously. If it wasn't for that trick of his, I would have killed him with my Zenith Tempest. How did he get away? The young man narrated languidly, well, we were fighting to the death and I already froze one of his arms and then it happened. He used his technique. Dulio shook his head quickly, saying, no, I smelled the aroma of a rare delicacy sold in the village where our battle occurred, a rare type of curry produced using naturally grown vegetables and spices. The possessor of Zenith Tempest had the bespectacled exorcist staring at him blankly. Don't tell me. Dulio scratched the back of his head and laughed sheepishly. Before I even realized it, I was already running for the place that cooked the curry, and well, the vampire probably used that opportunity to escape. Naruto's face was palmed. He turned to Seal and saw that she had completed her transaction with the merchant, carrying 8 cases that he assumed contained his sensei's preferred weapon, the corporeal demon repelling blades, black keys. I swear, Dulio Gesualdo, this better not come back and bite any of us in the ass. He pointed at her in jest, saying, you see what Curry has done. To his astonishment, his sensei ignored him and instead gave Dulio a sly glance. Was it the one sold in that stand beside the large building in the marketplace? She inquired. Dulio gave an enthusiastic nod. The really spicy and tangy vegetable curry, really worth letting a vampire go so I could eat fresh off the pot. Oh, I know that one. Definitely the best vegetable curry in the world. Know that I won't reprimand you for your course of action, as even I would have probably tempted to abandon combat for the sake of tasting and eating that luscious and heavenly curry. The vegetables were cooked to perfection. The ratios and mix of the spices used to create the sauce was nothing less than perfect. With a rather loud cough, Naruto attracted his peers' attention and effectively interrupted their curry-related conversation. Although it was a little impolite, it turned out to be the best move, because the last time the two discussed curry, they spent 3.5 hours discussing a wide variety of curry and its ingredients. In addition, he didn't really understand the appeal of curry because, in any case, ramen was superior. So yeah, speaking of vampires, I'm going on a mission to kill another one of them, one who's apparently somewhere in Italy. As he chewed on another mochi, Dulio blinked briefly. We've really getting a lot of missions about killing vampires recently, he said, not particularly bothered by the abrupt change of subject. The change was too problematic to discuss. With a slightly more formal tone, Seal inquired, are you going solo? His head was shaken by the church's sword. I'm working with someone from the church. Who it is I have no idea. Aside from that person, I'm also going to be working with Helsing. The brunette gave Naruto a worried look and said, Helsing, huh, are you? It's okay, sensei, I no longer have any ill will with that organization. Seal remained silent for a while as she studied him carefully, searching for any signs of dishonesty or rage beneath his composed exterior. The woman nodded after searching for a few seconds without finding what she was looking for. Good, wouldn't want your personal issues to get in the way of your mission. I thought you better than that. As he munched on some green tea mochi, Dulio nodded in agreement with the blue-haired executor's statement. So the vampire from any of the noble houses? I have no idea. The details are pretty vague. Normal vampiric abilities, and the target is supposed to be a vampire who was killed about 20+ years ago. Seal joked, so someone wasn't thorough in killing the vamp off. The Kusunagi's possessor shrugged as he said, and I have to clean up their mess. Not that I'm complaining about it. After all, it's my duty to kill the heathens that roam this world. With an exasperated sigh, Seal said, you know, you should really brighten up a bit. Doing nothing but missions and training would definitely make me insane. You should take a vacation. His spiky blonde hair bristled around as Naruto scratched the back of his head. I just got back from a week off, and you can say I love doing missions and training since they help to relax. Dulio remarked languidly, reminding his friends that despite being the church's most powerful exorcist, he was quite easygoing. You know, I wish I had the motivation that you're showing, but I'm rather content with slacking around and enjoying my delicacies as I travel around the world. To each his own, I guess. In a manner reminiscent of an ace lawyer, Seal turned to face Naruto and pointed a finger at him, saying, speaking of missions, What was this I heard about you fighting a vampire without using your Magatama or true holy sword? Wait, where did you hear that from? As the blonde continued to eat some mochi, the point moved from one to the other. We talked for a bit when we were waiting for our flight. Et tu, Dulio? Dulio gave a sheepish laugh. Well, I didn't really know I wasn't supposed to tell anyone that you tried fighting a vampire from the Teps with nothing but your mass-produced holy swords. Fair enough. The eldest of the three tapped the floor with her left foot, so I'm waiting for my explanation about that reckless stunt that you pulled. I didn't feel like using them, don't really see the problems since I won. As she assumed her notorious Seal Sensei persona, Seal gave Naruto a stern look, seemingly reprimanding him for dying and winning a game. She gestured to the pair of glasses on his face, his Magatama necklace, and then the sword resting on his back. Naruto-kun, yes, you won that fight, but next time you might not be lucky against your opponents and you may need to rely on the Seiji no Sanpo, 3 treasures of the sage, she said. Yada no Kagami, the wisdom of the sage, Yasukani no Magatama, benevolence of the sage, Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the valor of the sage. Using any of those 3 would almost always even out any battles you face. Care to explain why you aren't using any of them or their abilities? She returned to the necklace with 9 Magatama beads. Especially this one, since in my opinion it's the most useful out of all of them, as it gives you the ability to boost yourself in battle, so please care to share, Naruto-kun? Dulio, who still hadn't placed an order for his supplies, seemed to have forgotten why he was here in the first place as he chewed on some more mochi and muttered in his side, share. After giving them a brief glance, Naruto gave in to his sensei's pressure and explained his motivation to her, and consequently to Dulio. I prefer not to completely rely on these artifacts. Using them would dull my abilities, as it would lead me to being reliant on the boosts and abilities that they grant me upon activation, and continuous usage of them will make me predictable. You know that I like to polish and use my skills to their fullest during battles, and that I'm not the type to just flat out use a nuke in every combat situation. As the gentle senpai that she was, the longtime member of the church's burial agency faction reprimanded him. Naruto-kun, what you're saying is good and all, but you need to remember not using and practicing your other abilities can also, as you say, dull your abilities. You should really consider using them next time you fight or find yourself in a pinch, or even the next time you train, just so you won't get rusty. For his part, Dulio added, she's right, you know, what you did was really reckless, bordering stupid. Though I have to admit it was pretty cool and entertaining to see you beat the crap out of that Teps guy. He wasn't practicing using the powers of his artifacts, exposing Kusanagi's, so Naruto took a moment to process what they had said. In essence, his friend and sensei had a good point. In all honesty, he was unable to recall the last time he had utilized the Magatama's powers. She did make sense, and he didn't want her to be upset that he wasn't taking her advice, so he sighed and finally abandoned his prepared rebuttal. Okay, I promise to use them next time I train or find myself fighting someone strong. Good, that's my beloved student Naruto-kun. Dulio merely gave him a cheerful nod from the side, but she patted and rubbed his head, as she always did when she was pleased or proud of his behavior. Naruto grinned at his 2 allies, a tiny smile spreading across his face as the 3 of them talked about a variety of subjects. He said, as long as I can make you 2 happy. The bespectacled blonde then excused himself and left the group to begin his mission. The sun had long since set when Naruto Uzumaki reached Milan. Instead, a blanket of stars and the ethereal moon dominated the eternally clear skies. The exorcist found himself walking down a familiar set of streets after leaving his mode of transportation, a helicopter that landed atop a hospital since his last visit. Milan hasn't changed much. The streets, roads, and stunning architecture are all still as stunning as they were. Even the night's darkness couldn't take away from their beauty. In fact, he dared to say that it made his surroundings more visually appealing. One of these was Santa Maria della Grazie, also known as Holy Mary of Grace, the red brick wall of the renowned Dominican convent in Milan, which is recognized as a World Heritage Site and is well known for having the mural of The Last Supper by the renowned Leonardo da Vinci, looked stunning at night. The sage's descendant found himself making his way to the convent while cautiously observing that no one was in the area. No priests, no acolytes, no civilians. The entire street and the neighborhood around it seemed to have been deserted for the night. Taking that fact as evidence of either Helsing or his own organization, Naruto hurried through the convent's halls, benches, and altars until he arrived at the dimly lit refectory. He stopped right in front of the well-known mural that was the meeting place for the evening. As he gazed at the painting, his normally icy blue eyes glowed with a hint of melancholy, a sight he had witnessed numerous times. Each time he gazed at this painting, his eyes were drawn to a man sitting to the left of the Son of God, dressed in blue robes, carrying a small bag of cash. Iscariot, Judas the church's biggest traitor. He of the 30 silver coins whose kiss caused the Son of God to die unavoidably. But each time he looked at this picture, he didn't think of Judas. Instead, his thoughts were drawn to the word Iscariot, the same holy order that his teacher had served in until the end. While continuing to gaze at the mural, the young man muttered, "Alexander Sensei." As he remembered his teacher, his thoughts were racing. His teacher was a kind and caring man toward children and churchgoers, but when it came to his enemies, his sensei was ruthless, unstoppable, and a killer who bordered on psychotic. In a way, he adopted his teacher's philosophy, emphasizing the value of being kind and compassionate to people he regarded as close to himself while being merciless to the night creatures that caused misery in the world. When Naruto felt something moving in the shadows of the long white corridor leading to the mural, he snapped out of his reverie and let out a sigh. The dim lights in the refectory went out as he turned to see what had woken him up from his reverie. Even the windows near the ceiling were covered in a reddish mist, leaving the room completely dark. Even the most courageous men would have been brought to a state of catatonia by the fear-inspiring atmosphere of malice and dread that pervaded the air. The exorcist, however, displayed no fear in spite of the gloomy atmosphere because Naruto Uzumaki was different from many men. Play the Naruto Ost, Wild Beast, Beautiful Green. His eyes, which were magnificent cold blue orbs that scanned the area in search of the culprit behind this disaster, adapted to the darkness almost instantly. He inhaled sharply and noticed that the air smelled of iron. "The smell of blood, oh joy," he said flatly before he sighed in frustration. "Stop it with the theatrics. I know you're there, heathen. Come out before I make you." Curling, stalking, creeping, and then lashing out violently in the form of sharp threads that shot off the ground and sped towards the executor in a blatant attempt to impale him on the spot. Black wisps outlined in a hue of crimson blood rattled in the ground. The young man had enough time to flip himself through the air, avoiding all the tendrils, and land on a spot far from the deadly blackness. But the exorcist, who was responsible for manipulating those bloody black threads, saw them coming a mile away. As his eyes scanned the room, paying close attention to every detail to locate his assailant, 3 blades materialized between the knuckles in each of his hands. "I had a feeling that something like this would have happened if we were to meet again. You can come out now, wherever you are." Unaware that he and his assailant were inside a World Heritage Site, he instinctively threw all of his swords in the direction of the spot when he felt a surge of malevolent energy emanating from his left. Thunk thunk, there were dull thumps as his sword struck the hard concrete, but his opponent avoided his blow, or, more accurately, he dodged it in response. A number of black spikes shot up from the ground, forcing him to jump away again. This time, however, he summoned 2 blades, one in each hand, and turned around, successfully blocking a horizontal strike from what appeared to be a long pole covered in brown cloth. Clang! The room echoed with the sound of steel hitting steel, and then Naruto was overpowered by his assailant and sent flying back. His eyes never left the shadowed frame of his opponent as his feet skidded across the ground while he held on to both of his swords. At that moment, the early morning moon's light chose to lend him its assistance. The blonde saw the familiar features of his assailant as the light filtered through the darkened windows. His opponent is a curvy young lady with short blonde hair. She was dressed in a blood-red uniform, a short skirt, long black stockings, tall brown boots, and white gloves with eerie symbols engraved on them. To be honest, it would have been difficult to pass her off as anything other than a gorgeous 19-year-old girl if it weren't for her pale complexion and deadly blood-red eyes. Unfortunately, he was well aware that his young lady was a vampire named Sarah's Victoria, so that was not the case. There was a tense silence while they assessed each other and their opponents, carefully planning their next moves, and each other's 2 opponents who knew each other's fighting style played a mind game together. It was his assailant who spoke first. She held the long, thick pole-like object wrapped in brown cloth in one hand and spat out, "Hound." Her voice was a mixture of familiarity and rage. "Kitten." Naruto looked at the blonde-haired, sexy woman, or rather, the vampire, and returned the compliment. The number of swords in each hand rises from 1 to 3. Following the brief verbal exchange, tense silence reigned once more as both parties carefully assessed their opponents. It took 5 seconds in all before the vampire broke the silence. She hurried over to Naruto with a swift step, her hands gripping the big makeshift bat. The exorcist leaned back to avoid the first blow before she even swung the big object in a broad horizontal arc. The exorcist then swiftly moved to her vulnerable side and threw all 6 blades at her. Whoosh 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 whoosh. As they approached the vampire with unexpected speed, all 6 blades sped through the air, taking the vampire by surprise and impaling Sarah's across her chest and stomach. In most cases, mass-produced holy blades would be lethal to vampires, demons, and devils. However, in a few rare instances, creatures that fall into those categories have an innate resistance to the poisonous and lethal effects of the blessed blades because of the blood that ran through her veins and her advanced regeneration. He was positive that Sarah's Victoria was one of the few people with such resistance. He was therefore not overly shocked when she hardly batted an eye as his blades stabbed her. With a shrug, Sarah's rushed at him again, thrusting, swinging, and stabbing that big pole in her hand as if it weighed less than 60 kilograms. Knowing full well that a single one of those terrifying attacks with vampire powers could earn him a one-way hospital stay, Naruto muttered, "Please don't tell me that you're holding a grudge." She wielded and used her pole with the dexterity of a seasoned Bojutsu practitioner, shouting, "The last time we worked together, you left me trapped inside a mineshaft that was in a barren island in the middle of nowhere. You even bloody blew my helicopter up to strand me on that island." The bespectacled exorcist said in a deadpan voice, "I was dealing with my grief." He deliberately let his guard down, luring his opponent to strike at the gaps in his defense so that he would have a better chance of escaping each blow. "How is that dealing with your grief?" she said, swinging the makeshift staff so hard that it left a huge gash on the ground where it struck. After sidestepping her attack by rolling to the side, Naruto prepared his body to withstand the shockwave it created before directing chakra to his legs and kicking off the ground. He charged at his adversary, slicing past her while hurling multiple holy swords at her, each of which nailed a different part of her body. He ran around the vampire, for once relieved that he was a little quicker than his opponent, and said, "Your master did kill my own, and that made me unhappy. To balance things, have I made you unhappy by stranding you in the island? For how long again?" Not even flinching at the pain she felt with each mass-produced sword that wasn't holy enough to truly deserve her attention, she yelled, 2 months. As she brushed off his attacks, the fact that she had about 15 blades protruding from her body and that her own blood was splattering on her weapon and the church floor didn't even bother her. As he threw another sword at Sarah's and a vial of holy water, Naruto responded indifferently, more like a deadpan, What a coincidence, that was about the same amount of time I was upset due to my sensei's passing." She was able to tilt her head away to avoid the sword when her red eyes caught sight of it. She was soaked in pure, blessed water, however, as the vial of holy water smashed against her face. The smell of holy water, oh joy! The woman wiped the holy water from her face without even flinching, even though her pale skin was sizzling and burning when it touched the water. This further demonstrated that she was descended from a noble vampire family, possibly the best of all the vampire families and factions. She was, after all, descended from one of the few vampires to achieve ultimate class power levels. "Oh, so the little vampire girl is all grown up, finally gotten some of your insane master's quirks? Like that persistent ability of his to not die when everyone wants him dead." The executor, holding a sword in each hand, moved away from Sarah's, trying to think of another way to harm his attacker without using his Shinka Jutsu, sacred fire technique. He didn't want to burn this place down because he could only imagine how many people would be saddened by the fact that the original painting of the Last Supper was destroyed in a battle between a vampire and a priest, since he was technically going to work with her on this mission. He also intended to inflict just enough pain to make her wish she was dead, not enough to kill her. As she carefully removed each blade that impaled her body before throwing the bloodied blades on the ground, she retorted, "Says the little brat who tosses his swords around like his old teacher. How old were you the last time we met? You were pretty short back then, were you like 5? A faint sizzling sound and some pain and discomfort were present, but nothing the buxom blonde wasn't accustomed to by this time. In contrast, Naruto gave his opponent a frustrated glare. When they first met in the middle of London's flaming battlefield, he was about 10 or 11 years old. However, it was more of a farewell look than a fight. They simply passed each other while he battled against the ultimate class vampires and Iscariot's armies while she stood by her master's side. He didn't really meet the vampire until a joint mission to kill a remnant of the Nazis' artificial vampire project about 2 years ago. It was immediately clear that the two would not get along, as his younger self greeted the Draculina by putting a holy sword through her throat. It was undoubtedly a great way to introduce yourself to vampires and devils, but it was probably not the best way to introduce yourself to regular people after all. The blonde didn't know what would make a great first impression if a sword was thrust down their throat. Naruto opened the proverbial Pandora's box by uttering an insult he was itching to use against the vampire of Helsing. After taking her bringing up his former teacher as a cue, Naruto grinned as he remembered more information about the girl's master, a heathen named Alucard, who was one of the most infamous vampires in the world. Says the heathen whose master died from eating a cat. A tomcat at that. Who knew your master swung that way? It couldn't have come at a better time for her to swing her makeshift staff in his direction. Naruto enjoyed insulting and agitating his opponents because he was able to dodge the angry blow by just a few inches made them more predictable and sloppy. Naruto dodged the blow intended for her legs and then swung both of his blades out to try to cut them off from the thighs. Ceres reportedly anticipated this and was able to avoid his attack by stepping back a few paces. She then swung the long steel object at Naruto, causing the blonde to leap a little off the ground and, with a small amount of chakra, stand himself along the weapon's length. When tendrils of blackness made of blood whipped out from the length of her weapon, forcing him to turn his focus to the deadly objects, Naruto quickly abandoned his plans to attack her from there as he rushed towards her running atop her wrapped weapon. He cut several of them off with a swing of his blades, keeping them from getting to his body. Then he lowered himself a little and sent chakra flying from his legs back toward the ceiling and away from Ceres. The bespectacled exorcist's arms briefly vanished as he threw more than 100 precisely aimed, mass-produced holy swords at the vampire. During the brief time he was in the air as he flew backwards, he smirked at the vampire who was staring at the rain of swords with slightly widened eyes as he said, "Hyaku shi no aim. Rain of 100 deaths," without choosing to set the swords on fire. Ceres hefted her makeshift staff in front of her with her monstrous strength, holding it in two hands before deftly spinning it around. As her weapon's length clashed with the rain of holy steel, a symphony of clangs and clings reverberated throughout the deserted church. Her makeshift staff was exposed as nothing more than her notorious cannon, the Harkonnen, also known as a really big fucking cannon. As each passing blade she parried caused a piece of the cloth to be torn and shredded until nothing remained. With the aid of her inhuman powers, the vampire was able to deflect or block the 100 blades before Naruto could even touch the ground. Unfortunately for the church, however, a significant amount of the space where the Last Supper was kept was destroyed when the swords she blocked crashed into windows, walls, and the floor. Naruto hit the floor with a gentle thud, his back to a white wall and his front to the barrel of a massive cannon that a visibly irate Ceres was pointing in his direction. With an audible click, the vampire pulled the trigger and unleashed a massive armor-piercing shell that was capable of killing a sizable contingent of undead. "Eat this," she yelled. As Naruto did what no sane man would do, a tiny smile crept up his face. He chose to walk towards the speeding bullet rather than run or roll to the side to avoid it. His icy blue eyes never left its path as he cautiously followed the bullet while shifting his body into an impromptu Iaido stance. Then he swiftly pulled out the renowned grass-cutting sword in his back and easily cut the approaching projectile in two before quickly sheathing his blade. In the meantime, the bullet's two halves recklessly fly past him, colliding with the wall and exploding into a conflagration. He cocked his head to the side and asked, "Did I push a button?" As the fiery remnants of Ceres's cannon shot burned ferociously behind his body, Naruto asked, "Are you mad?" without really noticing or caring about the flames. As the exorcist fired another bullet into her cannon, Ceres snarled at her, "Master is not gay and he is definitely dead, unlike yours." With one blade in his left hand and three in his right, the bespectacled exorcist shrugged. "I see. Even after all these years, you're still stuck in the denial part of Kubler-Ross. I've already went through with it and I have accepted the part that my master died trying to kill your master." "I said he's not dead yet." Naruto waved her away in a hurry. Yeah, whatever makes you sleep at night." She gives the exorcist a fierce look. She stomped hard on the ground, making spider cracks appear on the bottom of her foot soles. "That's it, kitty gloves are off. Screw working together with you. I'll suplex your first then beat you to a bloody pulp, you asshole," she exclaimed as she extended her gloved hand toward the front of her body. She let go of her cannon and let it fall to the ground with a loud thud. With the back of her hand facing the exorcist, her right arm raised slightly. Her thumb was outstretched, her middle and forefingers pointed down, and her ring and index fingers curled up towards her palm. Her left hand simultaneously moved in the opposite direction, with the thumb out to the side, the middle and forefingers pointing upward, and the other two fingers curled upward. Her entire body was covered in blood-soaked darkness that radiated malevolent energy, and she closed both of her hands to form a makeshift square. One eerie red eye shone within the square. As more of the dark wisps of energy surrounded her, Ceres said, commencing the Cromwell invocation. As she said those words, what seemed like dozens of blood-red eyes opened all over her body, and the sense of dread in the church grew tenfold with each opened eye. As he let go of the mass-produced sacred blades and rested his left hand on Kusanagi's handle, Naruto questioned, "Oh, so you want to go all out, vampire girl?" He did promise Dulio and Seal Sensei that he would attempt to use the artifact's powers in the near future. Who was he to turn down the ideal opportunity that had now arrived? In the form of a necklace he wore, he spared a glance at the 9 Magatamas. He began drawing on the power that lay dormant within the sacred jewels after taking a deep breath and closing his eyes. "Would you like me to perform for you?" The exorcist's body erupted in waves of golden energy as a massive surge of power erupted. "Your last rites?" he asked in a tone that became more savage as more of the golden slivers of pure energy that gave the place life began to radiate from his body, negating the terrible atmosphere. As the dark energy surrounding her body grew in size and intensity, Sarah's continued with renewed resolve. Ability restrictions lifted for limited use until the enemy has been rendered silent. As a rough outline of a bright fox-like shroud of energy with one tail formed around his body, Naruto prayed, "O holy hosts above, I call upon thee as a servant of the Son of God, to sanctify my actions this day in preparation for the fulfillment of the will of God." Release restraint level, Uzumaki Hajutsu, Sosen, Uzumaki secret technique, ancestry. Unfortunately, the sound of multiple continuous gunfires interrupted the two as they were about to simultaneously unleash the majority of their powers and let hell loose. The sound of gunfire was followed by a loud, authoritative voice saying, "Enough. Both of you stand down." The ominous aura that surrounded Saras's body dissipated as soon as you heard that authoritative voice. Naruto was actually taken aback by this incident and blinked multiple times as the energy erupting around his body also vanished, and just like that, what ought to have been a legendary death fight with a lot of collateral damage that would be remembered for years to come was not only cut short, but also came to a complete halt. "I knew something like this might happen." Sarah's recoiled slightly as heavy footsteps reverberated throughout the refectory. Conversely, Naruto turned his head in the direction of the voice's owner. A woman with a big cigar was walking in their direction. She has strong blue eyes, creamy brown skin, and long blonde hair. She was dressed in a green suit that concealed the majority of her femininity and gave her a more masculine appearance. He recognized this individual right away as Sir Integra Fairbrook Winget's Helsing, the leader of the Helsing. Even though Naruto was aware that she was merely an ordinary person without any kind of power or ability, he couldn't help but think she was a little dangerous. She had the ability to control not one but two strong vampires at one point in her life, in addition to radiating an aura that demanded respect. He didn't know how she did it, but he was certain it was something big or intricate. A few paces ahead of the vampire and the exorcist, the older woman with the bespectacled eyes stopped. She glanced around, taking in the clear evidence of the minor altercation scattered throughout the church. She then turned to face the exorcist, whose blue eyes met hers with equally blue but icy ones. Her eyes finally left the exorcist and fell on the vampire, who was trying, failing, to identify herself by sticking her index fingers together like a child. "What have I told you about holding grudges? To not hold them?" the vampire asked stoically, avoiding eye contact with her mistress because of what she did. She didn't see her mistress approach her or see her fist fall on top of her head until it was too late and she was already squealing in agony. The buxom blonde didn't even react in this way to a disturbing idea like being stabbed by mass-produced holy swords. "And what did you do?" With a trembling finger, Sarah's gestured to Naruto, who was standing idly by the side. "I ambushed him to a fight." "And why did you do that?" Sarah's gazed at the ground, puffing out her cheeks. "Because of what happened last time." Integra pinched and stretched the vampire's cheeks before she could even react. "I told you to not attack the people of the church. I made it clear that we are now under their jurisdiction and that it is unwise for you to attack anyone from their group." She continued to pin. "You're causing trouble again and it's giving me a new set of gray hairs. I swear to Christ you're just like your master." Naruto was simply gazing at the scene in blankness the entire time. On the outside, he appeared to be completely composed, but on the inside, he was going crazy from the ridiculousness he was seeing. Integra wasn't utilizing any amulets, spells, or other mystical tools. No, she was simply keeping the vampire in line by pinching his cheek. "What is going on?" he whispered to himself as he watched the vampire he was thinking about using most of his powers on to fight. The same vampire who tanked and took his blows like they were nothing, being handled by a normal human. He wanted to slam his head against something very hard. He was startled out of his reverie by the sound of struggle and a body being pulled, and the exorcist discovered that Integra was approaching him while pinching Sarah's by her left ear and pulling the vampire with her. There was a tenfold increase in the urge to smash his head. As the head of Helsing shoved the vampire forward while still clinging to her ear, the two came to a halt a few paces from him. Integra looked at her organization's trump card and asked sharply, "So what do you say to the priest?" Like a child being forced to do something they didn't enjoy, Sarah's muttered, "Sorry." "What was that? I didn't hear you, Missy." She looked at Naruto, her red eyes meeting his blue ones, and said, "Fine." She turned to Integra and said, "I said I'm sorry. I sincerely apologize for attacking you out of nowhere there. I said it." Her red eyes begged, "Now can you please let me go?" As his mind reprocessed all the information he knew about Ceres and Integra, Naruto said flatly, "The hell?" Ignoring the fact that his regard for the former declined in direct proportion to the rise in Integra's respect, even so, his mind was still struggling to comprehend the ridiculousness of what he had just seen, and these thoughts did not help. Maybe he should forget this whole scene. Yes, when he returns to the Vatican, he should seek out Dokuro-chan so she can beat his head with her club and make him forget about the whole situation. As she let go of the vampire's ear, Integra nodded her head and grinned proudly. Her gaze settled on Naruto, and she said, "Now that's settled with. I assume that you were the exorcist, or rather executor, that we would be working with today. Is that right, Naruto Uzumaki?" The blonde chose to suppress everything he saw and any other upsetting memories that might interfere with his mission because he sensed that the conversation was becoming more somber and professional. "Indeed I am. It is a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance, although I would have preferred if it didn't involve standing on a battlefield." Before answering, she took a drag from her cigar and blew out white smoke. "I wouldn't say the same to you, though it is nice to finally meet the infamous Sword of the Church and Hound of the Vatican. I feel that you also owe our organization an apology for attacking and stranding dear Ceres here in the middle on an abandoned island in the Pacific. It was momentary lapse of judgment on my part as a result of grievance for my master Alexander Anderson's demise at the hands of your organization. I assure you such a thing would not happen a second time around." She glanced at Ceres, who was already standing behind her, and said, "Good, I expect nothing but strict professionalism from one of the best the church can offer. Why can't you act all calm and collected like this guy here?" She kicked some debris on the ground like a child and Ceres pouted. In return she returned the whisper, "I said I'm sorry." Naruto held back from letting out a sigh. "I promise to work together with your organization to the best of my ability. I will try to keep myself and her from killing one another while keeping any further collateral damage from occurring. Are those terms agreeable?" Instead of answering right away, Integra, being the astute woman she was, considered a number of ways to make the executor's statement fall short. "Make the promise for both you and your companion, then we have a deal." The exorcist said, "Agreed." Then he asked a question that had just come to him, "When does the operation start?" "At 2200 hours there will be a debriefing at the Palazzo Marino, the place where our temporary base of operations is stationed. After the briefing our groups will then head towards several helicopters stationed nearby that will take us to the scene, or at least near it, so we can set our last base of operation. The mission will officially begin at precisely 23:35 hours, just 5 minutes after our estimated arrival time." She inhaled a few puffs of smoke before exhaling it several times. "Is that clear?" He swiftly removed his phone from his pockets and checked the time, which showed that it was 19:30. He responded, "Crystal." He still had enough time to look for his partner before turning away from the two women and leaving the area to find his partner. He said respectfully, "I do apologize for making this meeting short, but I will have to pardon myself until the appointed time." Ceres observed the proceedings until the executor had left the church. Suddenly realizing what had happened, she asked, "Wait, who's going to clean all of this up?" "Who do you think?" inquired Integra when the vampire saw that she and her boss were the only people in the church. She pointed to herself after searching left, right, front, and back for anyone else. Me?" Integra began to move toward the exit and said, "You have 3 hours. This isn't fair. Life isn't fair. You should already know that by now." Ceres appeared deflated and said, "I suppose I'll start cleaning now." Integra took a final drag from her cigar before tossing it to the ground amid the debris the two fighters had created, grinning smugly like the fierce boss she was. As she walked out of the convent's charred and shattered refectory, she said, "You do that. Play a calmly wind, Sengoku Rance Ost," repeatedly until the end. A serene wind blew through the air as Naruto Uzumaki emerged from the Santa Maria delle Grazi's walls. The church's executor, unsure of where to look for a partner for this mission, decided to stroll the city in search of someone who would stand out from the crowd. He discovered that the different city dwellers were going about their fleeting lives, utterly unaware of the danger that lurks within the constant darkness, as he strolled through the busy city outside the convent's closed-off area. At times, he couldn't help but wonder what it must be like to live such a contented and peaceful life, full of illusionary calm and peace, one in which the murders he willed, had committed were not a cause for concern or reflection. However, he was ultimately certain that such a life was not feasible for someone like him. He was, after all, a church sword, a weapon that had been forged, tampered with, and refined to kill pagan people. The sweet fruits of labor, the sweat nectar known as peace and normalcy, are never available to a weapon of war. Due to the relatively cold temperature caused by the climate, he inhaled deeply and exhaled, releasing a warm mist. Why was that on his mind? Normally, he would have focused solely on his mission, considering the goals that needed to be accomplished and the most efficient way to accomplish them. After that, he would have returned to headquarters, reported, taken another mission, and left. That was his life cycle. Even though he was content with such a basic life, something was off. He had no idea what it was, but he was certain that something was wrong. His mind flashed back to a blue rose to avoid thinking about things that would interfere with his mission. Naruto shook his head. The moment was not for contemplation. The time had come to take action to continue this mission for the church's benefit. While searching for his mate, searching the city for his partner, who was still missing, the true wielder of the holy sword accelerated his pace. In all honesty, he still didn't know who his partner was because the folder Garul gave him only stated that he would recognize the person when he saw them. It seems that the person would be extremely visible and would definitely stand out, which is significant considering that there were only a few million people living in this city. The young man with the bespectacles eventually found himself strolling toward the Castello Sforzesco, a sizable citadel that had once been home to the Duke of Milan but was now only an antiquated artifact that was used as a museum and tourist attraction. Despite the chilly wind, Naruto walked to the castle while carefully examining his surroundings. In front of the citadel, there was a sizable square with a large fountain where city dwellers sat and chatted while taking in the cool evening air. His gaze then strayed to the left of the fountain, where he discovered an elderly flower vendor packing his belongings and probably heading home for the night. Then he noticed someone sitting close to the fountain. The person was wearing a white cloak that covered the majority of their body, which did a good job of hiding who they were, but it did a terrible job of hiding their presence because they stood out like a sore thumb. As he approached the person in the cloak, Naruto shook his head slowly and a tiny drop of perspiration fell down the back of his head to get their attention. He said, "So you're my partner for this mission?" The cloaked person nodded in response, and the exorcist saw a familiar flash of blue from beneath the hood that concealed the face. The blonde executor heard a low groaning sound coming from the person's stomach as he got closer to the cloaked figure. This sound was actually familiar. The person nodded slowly in response to the question, "You lost all your money again, didn't you?" But he thought he saw a flash of red under the hood, a blush, most likely from embarrassment if it exists. Naruto let out a sigh. "Don't tell me you're making a habit out of this, cause seriously this would be like the 15th time this happened to you ever since we started partnering up for missions a few years back." The person wearing the cloak spoke in a baritone, unfeminine voice, but Naruto recognized the tone and the exorcist knew that the person he was speaking to was a girl. "It was not my fault this time. I was convinced by some merchants into purchasing this." He saw her insert her hand into her cloak and search for a few seconds before removing an object that instantly caused the young man with the bespectacles to raise an eyebrow. The person in the cloak was holding a phallic object that looked suspicious. The merchant said that this is a stake used to kill vampires. They insisted on me buying it and stressed the point that it was a weapon for fighting vampires and it would protect me if I were ever to encounter one. Though I don't really see how you can use it. The point is too dull, not sharp like normal stakes. The use of the studs along the length of the stake also confuses me as I don't know what they are used for, though I think they may be used in conjunction with the stake's vibrating capabilities. I also think that it might be used for a form of ritual, or are they sacred runes or sigils used to reinforce this stakes? Before she could even finish her sentence, Naruto's hands already lashed out and grasped the suspicious-looking stake. Without giving it any thought, Naruto found himself hurling the damned object westward through the air with all the force his body and chakra could muster, until it was reduced to a silver glint in the night sky. Strength. She gave a funny blink beneath her cloak, then followed the trajectory of the stake's throw and saw that it was merely a tiny dot in the dazzling sky. "Oh. Why did you do that, Uzumaki? It could have been useful during our fight against the vampire." The starving exorcist of the church purchased a phallic object for self-pleasure and reproduction, not a stake, as Naruto stated definitively. "Trust me, we don't need it. Someday, he would truly need to thank Kuri-sensei for teaching him about that. Otherwise, he wouldn't know what to do as his current companion." The thought of using such a device during a vampire hunt made him shudder. He was certain that the vampires would have laughed themselves to death if he had removed that stake. As an aside, he still remembered a period of time when he believed that the protection offered by the church was equivalent to that found in convenience stores. Embarrassment is not even close to describing his feelings on that one occasion. With a single glance, Naruto realized that the cloaked exorcist was the source of the frightful aura that successfully pulled him out of his reverie for a brief moment. Naruto thought the eyes concealed within glowed an unusually frightening red. "I spent all my money on that, Uzumaki. I do hope that you're planning on compensating for it." As he said, "I would normally do that, but not now, not when our hunt is to start in a few hours." He shook his head in the hopes that she wouldn't hear. He whispered the final sentence, "But you are also at fault for carelessly spending your money on random objects that attract your attention. Take this as another learning experience for you, just like all the other times." He was heard by her. "What was that?" "I said it's good to see you again. He waved her away while grinning naively at his mission partner. A smile that their sword instructor Griselda Quarta frequently wore and used when she wants things to go her way. He gives her this smile. When he flashed that familiar but unsettling smile, his fellow exorcist recoiled. Her body instinctively slipping away from his, the exorcist put her hands on her temples and began massaging them, saying, please don't do that, you know that smile unnerves me." As he diverted the conversation from what would have likely turned into a fight between the two of them, Naruto nodded in satisfaction. This one was well trained by Griselda sensei. One of them was already staring down at the ground in shame at her apparent predicament when another gurgle of the stomach reverberated between them. His left hand extended toward the exorcist as he turned to face her, beckoning her to use it to stand up. After observing his partner's apparent predicament, the blonde proposed, "Well, how about we go out and have dinner before our mission, you know, since our mission doesn't start in a few hours and it's been a while since we've been on a mission together." After a moment of staring at the outstretched limb, his cloaked partner reached out and grasped it with her thin, rough hand. She got herself up with a single little sigh, using her free hand to dust her cloak while keeping her other hand connected to Naruto's. The girl remarked, "It really has been a long time, Uzumaki." He gave her a gentle smile and said, "Let's find a nearby restaurant, we can catch up while we eat, it's even my treat." As if speaking for her without her permission, her stomach rumbled again. "I would enjoy that," she confessed, lowering her head to hide her embarrassment from him. The blonde said, "Come on then, let's go." He continued to hold her hand as he walked through the town, guiding her to a restaurant he had seen briefly moments earlier. The exorcist didn't bother to conceal her tone of relief and joy as she said, "Thank you, Uzumaki." Naruto turned back to her to respond, but a fierce wind gust passed just in time. The red roses from the peddler's cart flew into the air, their petals being pulled by the harsh wind as they separated from the flowers, creating a miniature storm of red petals that flitted across the night sky. Simultaneously, the wind blew back the hood that concealed his companion's features, exposing them to the world of floating rose petals. She was a young lady about his age, with short blue hair and green fringe that contrasted with the momentarily red scenery behind her, and strong brown eyes. The red behind her made her more attractive to his eyes, and he paused for a moment to notice how much she had changed since they had last seen each other. Some 4 years ago she was brave, fierce, and strong, and red was the ideal color to describe her. This color is very appropriate for his fellow swordsman, or in this case, swordswoman, as it is aggressive and violent. "I appreciate it," she said, bringing him briefly back to reality and giving him the opportunity to respond to her statement with his own. "After all, that's what friends are for, right?" Naruto asked as he and his companion strolled in search of a place to eat under the brilliant and lovely night sky. "There's no problem, Zenobia," he said, shaking his head as if to emphasize his points before sending her a single, endearing smile. In the end, he was happy and content with life when he saw those he cared for happy.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.